So let's deep dive into some case studies and let's try to take some examples of some of the stocks or some of the companies that you recently wrote on the bear cave. And let's try to analyze how do you find red flags in the company and walk us through your entire process of finding the red flag. And then how do right from how do you find the company? How do you figure out that, okay, there are some red flags here, and then to the end part, which is about writing. So can you just walk us through an entire process using a case study?
Okay, so finding companies can come from a variety of different ways. One way that I'm starting to do now that is more tech focused is every month I ask ChatGPT, please look through all the recent IPOs and SPAC mergers of publicly traded companies and identify me ones that have high levels of consumer complaints. And I'll do that. I'll give it to ChatGPT Deep Research O3, and it'll come back to me 20 minutes later with, hey, here's 10 companies with high levels of consumer complaints. And I'll look at all 10 and maybe decide to pursue 2 more deeply. And if I decide that, hey, this is one I want to dig in more deeply, I'll go look, I'll see what consumers are saying. I'll try to identify a pattern of issues. I'll try to see if competitors have a similar issue. And if it seems like something smells wrong, if there's something the market's not picking up, then I'll go to state regulators and file FOIA complaints, FOIA requests for consumer complaints on the business. An example that I've done recently is KinderCare. So the way I found KinderCare, this big publicly traded daycare company, is asked ChatGPT. It identified it as one of the high-level consumer complaints. I look online. I see on social media and local news reports that there's a lot of complaints about this business and its safety practices and how they're treating children. I see that this is obviously a core issue to the business. I go use FOIA to get hundreds of pages of consumer complaints against the company. I see over and over again really egregious issues, and ultimately become convinced that this is going to become a long-term issue for the company, its brand, its ability to obtain government funds, which is 30% of its business. So I write a report, and that goes a little viral and gets a podcast, and then a lawmaker reaches out and starts to tweet about it, and why should they be getting so much in government funds, and in a way becoming its own catalyst. So that's one example. Another example we could talk about that was early on is Care.com or Chegg. Those are some other ones that have been big in my career.
So can you walk me through both these companies, so Care.com as well as the Chegg? And what was your thesis? How did you find the red flags and what happened exactly?
So Care.com was the first one. This was the rise. So nothing would exist if not for Care.com. So Care.com was $1 billion publicly traded babysitting platform where parents would go to find babysitters and babysitters could advertise their services to parents. And I just finished freshman year of college. And my friend who was a babysitter on the platform said, you should check them out. They seem a little shady. Something seems off. And so I just did a Google search, and I could see in local news stories that a bunch of parents were complaining about the company not doing the background checks right and getting, people with criminal histories on the site. And I decided this is an important issue for the company. Are they doing their background checks? So I decided to test it out myself by applying to be a babysitter on Care.com as Harvey Weinstein, who's in the news for abuse and misconduct allegations. So I used this bad person to apply. I use a photo of Harvey Weinstein. I use the email Harvey the babysitter gmail.com. I make up a social security number. I make up all this information. And at the end, I consent to their background check. And they say, we'll get back to you in 24 to 48 hours on whether or not you're approved to be a babysitter as this person. And I thought, there's no way I'd get approved. This is obviously a fake account. This is the most easy thing to flag. And 48 hours later, hello, Harvey, I was approved. I was documenting it all. I was applying to babysitting jobs as this fake person, CPR certified, all this crazy stuff. I'm like, you clearly aren't doing the background checks you claim to be doing. So boom, that's how I knew something was wrong. And from there, I wrote up a little report. The stock fell a little. A board member resigned the day after my report. And, I was just kind of happy. Okay, I got a little win. I'm getting good at this. And it would have gone nowhere, except the company decided to call Stanford to complain about me. And a week or two later, I get an email from the dean of students saying, we need to meet with you. And up until this point in my life, I'd never gotten in trouble. I was as straight as air. So I was terrified. I was so nervous. And I didn't know for sure it was Care.com, but it was the only thing I could think of that I did. So I go into this meeting and they say, well, we got a complaint about your Wi-Fi usage. You're impersonating other people, violating your terms of service. I just remember thinking this is the weirdest meeting. And at the end, they said, would you be willing to take your article down? And I said no. And then they said, you can't use Stanford Wi-Fi to do this anymore. And I thought, this doesn't seem right to me. So naturally, as a rebellious guy, I did the exact opposite. I continued to research the company. And on my very last day, sophomore year, I published another report and I got obsessed on them. So this is when I did my first FOIAs. I went to every state for consumer complaints against care.com. And that's how I learned how each state interprets FOIA differently and which ones have complaints and the likes of that. I went to even police departments to see anytime someone used care.com in a 911 call. I had all these theories and, really becoming obsessed about the business. So I did this other report and it goes viral and I see all these complaints, not just safety issues, but also billing issues with the company, people saying that they're being overbilled, they can't cancel the subscription, a lot of crazy stuff. And that report goes a little viral. And I was convinced that there was a big issue with this company, particularly around safety. So I cold emailed about 100 journalists. I talk about this all the time with everybody. And ultimately, the Wall Street Journal got involved. There's a front page story about a year after where care.com babysitters with criminal histories were approved on the site. And in 8 cases or so, kids died in their care. And it was terrible. And the CEO, CFO, general counsel resigned. The stock fell by about half and was ultimately bought out at a lower price than when I started writing about it. And that, gave me a lot of confidence and showed me you can make an impact. And it gave me a lot of credibility that later transferred into people being interested in what I had to say when I was writing The Bear Cave.
Wow. So this is how the journey of Bear Cave started. Like care.com was the main thing. Like this was the first company you wrote.
It was the first one I wrote about publicly. And this is even before, this is when I was a college student, but it gave me a Twitter following and it made people think, okay, I kind of care what this kid has to say because he was right about one company. What does he want to say about other things? And, so then I interned on and off at Sophos all 4 years. I probably would have worked for them, except the main guy was in the process of retiring or thinking about that. So I couldn't work for them. So I wanted to get a job and I talked to a lot of hedge funds, but I just noticed, especially in the New York crowd, I wasn't as connected with them. And they're very suit and tie and formal and hierarchical. And they very much care about modeling and numbers, which is not my strength. And every place I talked to was like, no, you're going to fit into this mold. And, it wasn't my type of MO. So I, from my past experience, I'm like, I'll just write smart stuff online and someone will want to hire me. So I start this newsletter senior year, February 2020, and the pandemic came and I just grew the newsletter. It was the best time ever to write a newsletter. And ultimately people were willing to pay for it and it just became a full-time job that way, hedge funds paying for it. 5 years later, that's all I still do.
Wow, that's so inspiring.
If you learned something new from this video, do share it with your friends and subscribe to this channel so that we can bring you the best content possible. Also, if you want to watch this entire episode, click on the link in the description box and you can go to Kushal Lodha YouTube channel and watch the entire podcast episode. Thank you so much for watching this and have an amazing day.